Steven Crowder, so many Dave Rubin, so many great Ali Stuckey. I mean, there's just too many hosts to mention. They're just all fantastic, and you're going to miss them if you are not a subscriber to Blaze TV. All right, before we go, there is a little dispute grew in a neighborhood in Michigan. There was about 100 years ago, a farm was developed, and there was an issue with the way the property was divided. There was a dispute over the property line. These things happen. They cause little battles inside of a community. Minor problem, right? Minor problem. Well, it's kind of festered over time. In this way, really, almost literally. So the development of this battle went back and forth for a while. And eventually, they decided to put up a wall. Now, I guess this proves that walls work because they were able to separate the two homes. Unfortunately, the wall was made of poop. It was a manure wall. He called it a compost wall, which is a much better way of saying it. He didn't have any problems. It was a compost wall, and it was on my property. What's the problem? The other guy's like, well, if I open up my window, my whole house smells like poop, so now I can't. I mean, look, you know, this is this is a Detroit story, I suppose, and in an effort to say, I mean, look, I guess you can have crap in Detroit, after all.
Mr. Speaker! Mr. Speaker! The President of the United States!
Whether it's the State of the Union, first address, special message, when a president speaks before a joint session, historic moments for our nation are made.
The dream of equal rights.
On a great national journey.
America makes the following demands on the Taliban.
Of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the earth.
1941, a date which will live in infamy.
But tonight, this speech before Congress has the potential to be bigger than all the others.
We're for limited government so that every American of every race and region shares fully in the flowering of American prosperity and freedom.
This speech could fundamentally transform our economy, our nation, shifting America towards an entirely new direction, a path we've never been on before. Tonight, Biden's big speech, the president's address to Congress. Hello, America. I feel badly for so many Americans who are going to be watching this speech tonight on mainstream media or corporate media, as they will not get the truth of what is really being said tonight. There was a meeting between the president and several anchors on corporate media, and they report some very disturbing things that were said. Talk about an autocracy and the fact that only an autocracy will be able to survive. A democracy most likely will not be able to. The things that he is going to be proposing tonight will not be lip service. It is important that you stay after and inform yourself with the commentary that we will be getting from Mark Levin, Steve Deace, Stu Burguiere will be with me, and our head writer and chief of foreign affairs and military affairs, Jason Buttrill, will be joining us as well. If you do not subscribe to The Blaze, boy, tonight is an important night that we would ask you to do that. The promo code is Malarkey, and you'll save $20. You will understand more if you have been watching our specials on the Great Reset. You will understand that you will no longer believe that it is anything other than it's not a conspiracy. It is in play, and you will see it tonight. The president is about to say, I'm stepping here just shy of my 100 days in office, 100 days since I took the oath, lifted my hand off our family Bible and inherited a nation in crisis. The worst pandemic in a century, the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression, and the worst attack on our democracy since the Civil War. He says, but we're going to turn crisis into an opportunity. He is going to be saying a lot of things about jobs and talking to people who don't have jobs. And he's going to be proposing about $5 trillion in additional spending. So you know, CNN has reported that Biden met with a group of advisors. I'm trying to keep my eye on when the president comes in. A group of anchors, and he said, and this is a quote, I've spoken it over with, I guess, by that time, 20 or 30 heads of state, including Putin and including Xi of China. I've had a 2-hour conversation with President Xi. I've been convinced for a long time. I doubt whether many will agree with me, but I think they're going to write about this point in history, not about any of us here, not about whether, but about whether or not a democracy can function in the 21st century. Not a joke. Whether autocracy is the answer, they were my discussions and debates I've had many times I've met with President Xi. He is making the case, and I doubt he will make this in the speech tonight, but this is the framework that you need to understand. All of this money will be spent to build an autocracy and the framework of an autocracy. And they are going to begin their campaign tonight that while they'll give lip service to a democracy, they will talk about how only an autocracy can move fast enough for today's issues. This is something that Mussolini was very clear about in the 1930s. Here he is, the President of the United States, with a speech in a time of crisis, and these always carry very heavy weight. Do not dismiss any of the words from the President tonight.
Congress, I have the high privilege and distinct honor to present to you the President of the United States.
Thank you. Good to be back. Mitch and Chuck will understand it's good to be almost home. Down the hall. Anyway, thank you all. Madam Speaker, Madam Vice President. No president has ever said those words from this podium. No president has ever said those words. And it's about time. First Lady, I'm her husband. Second Gentleman, Chief Justice, members of the United States Congress and the Cabinet, distinguished guests, my fellow Americans. While the setting tonight is familiar, this gathering is just a little bit different. A reminder of the extraordinary times we're in. Throughout our history, presidents have come to this chamber to speak to Congress, to the nation, and to the world, to declare war, to celebrate peace, to announce new plans and possibilities. Tonight, I come to talk about crisis and opportunity, about rebuilding the nation, revitalizing our democracy, and winning the future for America. I stand here tonight, one day shy of the 100th day of my administration. 100 days since I took the oath of office and lifted my hand off our family Bible and inherited a nation, we all did, that was in crisis. The worst pandemic in a century. The worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. The worst attack on our democracy since the Civil War. Now, After just 100 days, I can report to the nation, America is on the move again. Turning peril into possibility, crisis to opportunity, setbacks into strength. We all know life can knock us down, but in America, we never, ever, ever stay down. Americans always get up. Today, that's what we're doing. America's rising anew, choosing hope over fear, truth over lies, and light over darkness. After 100 days of rescue and renewal, America is ready for a takeoff, in my view. We're working again, dreaming again, discovering again, and leading the world again. We have shown each other and the world that there's no quit in America, none. 100 days ago, America's house was on fire. We had to act. And thanks to the extraordinary leadership of Speaker Pelosi, Majority Leader Schumer, and the overwhelming support of the American people, Democrats, Independents, and Republicans, we did act. Together we passed the American Rescue Plan, one of the most consequential rescue packages in American history. We're already seeing the results. We're already seeing the results. After I promised we'd get 100 million COVID-19 vaccine shots into people's arms in 100 days, we will have provided over 220 million COVID shots in those 100 days. Thanks to all the help of all of you. We're marshaling, with your help, everyone's help, we're marshaling every federal resource. We've gotten vaccines to nearly 40,000 pharmacies and over 700 community health centers where the poorest of the poor can be reached. We're setting up community vaccination sites, developing mobile units to get to hard-to-reach communities. Today, 90% of Americans now live within 5 miles of a vaccination site. Everyone over the age of 16, everyone is now eligible to get vaccinated right now, right away. Go get vaccinated, America. Go and get the vaccination. They're available. You're eligible now. When I was sworn in on January 20th, less than 1% of the seniors in America were fully vaccinated against COVID-19. 100 days later, 70% of seniors in America over 65 are protected, fully protected. Senior deaths from COVID-19 are down 80% since January, down 80% because of all of you. And more than half of all the adults in America have gotten at least one shot. A mass vaccination center in Glendale, Arizona, I asked the nurse, I said, "What's it like?" She looked at me and she said, "It's like every shot is giving a dose of hope," was her phrase, a dose of hope. A dose of hope for an educator in Florida who has a child suffering from an autoimmune disease. Wrote to me, said she's worried, and she was worried about bringing the virus home. She said she then got vaccinated at a large site in her car. She said she sat in her car when she got vaccinated and just cried. Cried out of joy and cried out of relief. Parents, seeing the smiles on their kids' faces for those who are able to go back to school because the teachers and school bus drivers and cafeteria workers have been vaccinated. Grandparents, hugging their children and grandchildren instead of pressing hands against the window to say goodbye. It means everything. Those things mean everything. You know, there's still, you all know it, you know it better than any group of Americans, there's still more work to do to beat this virus. We can't let our guard down. But tonight, I can say, because of you, the American people, our progress these past 100 days against one of the worst pandemics in history has been one of the greatest logistical achievements this country's ever seen. What else have we done in those first 100 days? We kept our commitment, Democrats and Republicans, of sending $1,400 rescue checks to 85% of American households. We've already sent more than 160 million checks out the door. It's making a difference. You all know it when you go home. For many people, it's making all the difference in the world. The single mom in Texas who wrote me, she said she couldn't work, but she said the relief check put food on the table and saved her and her son from eviction from their apartment. A grandmother in Virginia who told me she immediately took her granddaughter to the eye doctor, something she said she put off for months because she didn't have the money. One of the defining images, at least from my perspective in this crisis, has been cars lined up for miles. And not people just barely able to start those cars, nice cars, lined up for miles, waiting for a box of food to be put in their trunk. I don't know about you, but I didn't ever think I'd see that in America. And all of this is through no fault of their own. No fault of their own, these people are in this position. That's why the rescue plan is delivering food and nutrition assistance to millions of Americans facing hunger. And hunger is down sharply already. We're also providing rental assistance. You all know this, but the American people, I want to make sure they understand. Keeping people from being evicted from their homes. Providing loans to small businesses that reopen and keep their employees on the job. During these 100 days, an additional 800,000 Americans enrolled in the Affordable Care Act when I established a special sign-up period to do that. 800,000 in that period. We're making one of the largest one-time ever investments, ever, in improving health care for veterans. Critical investments to address the opioid crisis. And maybe most importantly, thanks to the American Rescue Plan, we're on track to cut child poverty in America in half this year. And in the process, while this was all going on, the economy created more than 1,300,000 new jobs in 100 days. More jobs in the first 100 days than any president on record. The International Monetary Fund is now estimating our economy will grow at a rate of more than 6% this year. That will be the fastest pace of economic growth in this country in nearly 4 decades. America's moving forward, but we can't stop now. We're in competition with China and other countries to win the 21st century. We're at a great inflection point in history. We have to do more than just build back better. We have to build back better. We have to compete more strenuously than we have. Throughout our history, if you think about it, public investment in infrastructure has literally transformed America. Our attitudes as well as our opportunities. The Transcontinental Railroad, the interstate highways, united 2 oceans and brought a totally new age of progress to the United States of America. Universal public schools and college aid opened wide the doors of opportunity. Scientific breakthroughs took us to the moon. Now we're on Mars, discovering vaccines, gave us the internet, and so much more. These are investments we made together as one country, and investments that only the government was in a position to make. Time and again, they propel us into the future. That's why I proposed the American Jobs Plan, a once-in-a-generation investment in America itself. This is the largest jobs plan since World War II. It creates jobs to upgrade our transportation infrastructure, jobs modernizing our roads, bridges, highways, jobs building ports and airports, rail corridors, transit lines. It's clean water. And today, up to 10 million homes in America and more than 400,000 schools and child care centers have pipes with lead in them, including drinking water. A clear and present danger to our children's health. American Jobs Plan creates jobs replacing 100% of the nation's lead pipes and service lines, so every American can drink clean water. And the process will create thousands and thousands of good-paying jobs. It creates jobs connecting every American with high-speed internet, including 35% of the rural America that still doesn't have it. This is going to help our kids and our businesses succeed in the 21st century economy. And I'm asking the Vice President to lead this effort, if she would. Of course. Because I know it will get done. Creates jobs building a modern power grid. Our grids are vulnerable to storms, hacks, catastrophic failures with tragic results, as we saw in Texas and elsewhere during the winter storms. The American Jobs Plan will create jobs that lay thousands of miles of transmission lines needed to build a resilient and fully clean grid. We can do that. Look, the American Jobs Plan will help millions of people get back to their jobs and back to their careers. 2 million women have dropped out of the workforce during this pandemic. 2 million. And too often because they couldn't get the care they needed to care for their child or care for an elderly parent who needs help. 800,000 families are on the Medicare waiting list right now to get home care for their aging parent or loved one with disability. If you think it's not important, check out in your own district, Democrat or Republican, Democrat or Republican voters. Their great concern, almost as much as their children, is taking care of an elderly loved one who can't be left alone. Medicaid contemplated it, but this plan is going to help those families and create jobs for our caregivers with better wages and better benefits, continuing a cycle of growth. For too long, we've failed to use the most important word when it comes to meeting the climate crisis: jobs. 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 For me, when I think climate change, I think jobs. The American Jobs Plan will put engineers and construction workers to work building more energy-efficient buildings and homes. Electrical workers, IBEW members installing 500,000 charging stations along our highways so we can own the electric car market. Farmers planting cover crops so they can reduce the carbon dioxide in the air and get paid for doing it. Look, think about it. There is simply no reason why the blades for wind turbines can't be built in Pittsburgh instead of Beijing. No reason. None. No reason. So, folks, there's no reason why American workers can't lead the world in the production of electric vehicles and batteries. I mean, there is no reason. We have the capacity. We're the brightest, best trained people in the world. The American Jobs Plan is going to create millions of good-paying jobs, jobs Americans can raise a family on. As my dad would then say, with a little breathing room. And all the investments in the American Job Plan will be guided by one principle: buy American. Buy American. And I might note parenthetically, that does not violate any trade agreement. It's been the law since the 30s. Buy American. American tax dollars are going to be used to buy American products made in America to create American jobs. That's the way it's supposed to be, and it will be in this administration. And I made it clear to all my cabinet people, their ability to give exemptions has been strenuously limited. It will be American products. Now, I know some of you at home are wondering whether these jobs are for you. So many of you, so many of the folks I grew up with, feel left behind, forgotten, in an economy that's so rapidly changing. It's frightening. I want to speak directly to you, because you think about it. That's what people are most worried about. Can I fit in? Independent experts estimate the American Jobs Plan will add millions of jobs and trillions of dollars to economic growth in the years to come. It is an 8-year program. These are good-paying jobs that can't be outsourced. Nearly 90% of the infrastructure jobs created in the American Jobs Plan do not require a college degree. 75% don't require an associate's degree. The American Jobs Plan is a blue-collar blueprint to build America. That's what it is. And it recognizes something I've always said in this chamber and the other. Good guys and women on Wall Street, but Wall Street didn't build this country. The middle class built the country, and unions built the middle class. So that's why I'm calling on Congress to pass Protect the Right to Organize Act, the PRO Act, and send it to my desk so we can support the right to unionize. And by the way, while you're thinking about sending things to my desk, let's raise the minimum wage to $15. No one working 40 hours a week, no one working 40 hours a week should live below the poverty line. We need to ensure greater equity and opportunity for women. And while we're doing this, let's get the Paycheck Fairness Act to my desk as well. Equal pay. It's been much too long. And if you wonder whether it's too long, look behind me. And finally, the American Jobs Plan will be the biggest increase in non-defense research and development on record. We'll see more technological change. And some of you know more about this than I do. We'll see more technological change in the next 10 years than we saw in the last 50. That's how rapidly artificial intelligence and so much more is changing. And we're falling behind the competition with the rest of the world. Decades ago, we used to invest 2% of our gross domestic product in America, 2% of our gross domestic product in research and development. Today, Mr. Secretary, that's less than 1%. China and other countries are closing in fast. We have to develop and dominate the products and technologies of the future. Advanced batteries, biotechnology, computer chips, clean energy. The Secretary of Defense can tell you, and those of you who work in national security issues know, the Defense Department has an agency called DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency. The people who set up before I came here, and that's been a long time ago, to develop breakthroughs that enhance our national security. That's their only job. And it's a semi-separate agency. It's under the Defense Department. It's led to everything from the discovery of the internet to GPS and so much more that's enhanced our security. The National Institute of Health, the NIH, I believe, should create a similar advanced research projects agency for health. And here's what it would do. It would have a singular purpose: to develop breakthroughs to prevent, detect, and treat diseases like Alzheimer's, diabetes, and cancer. I'll still never forget when we passed the cancer proposal in the last year I was vice president. Almost $9 million going to NIH. And they've excused the point of personal privilege. I'll never forget you standing, Mitch, and saying, "Name it after my deceased son." It meant a lot. But so many of us have deceased sons, daughters, and relatives who died of cancer. I can think of no more worthy investment. I know of nothing that is more bipartisan. So let's end cancer as we know it. It's within our power. It's within our power to do it. Investments in jobs and infrastructure like the ones we're talking about have often had bipartisan support in the past. Vice President Harris and I met regularly in the Oval Office with Democrats and Republicans and discussed the jobs plan. And I applaud a group of Republican senators who just put forward their own proposal. So let's get to work. I wanted to lay out before the Congress my plan before we got into the deep discussions. I'd like to meet with those who have ideas that are different, they think are better. I welcome those ideas. But the rest of the world is not waiting for us. I just want to be clear. From my perspective, doing nothing is not an option. Look, we can't be so busy competing with one another that we forget the competition that we have with the rest of the world to win the 21st century. Secretary Blinken can tell you I spent a lot of time with President Xi. Traveled over 17,000 miles with him. Spent, they tell me, over 24 hours in private discussions with him. When he called to congratulate him, we had a 2-hour discussion. He's deadly earnest about becoming the most significant, consequential nation in the world. He and others, autocrats, think that democracy can't compete in the 21st century with autocracies because it takes too long to get consensus. To win that competition for the future, in my view, we also need to make a once-in-a-generation investment in our families and our children. That's why I've introduced the American Families Plan tonight, which addresses 4 of the biggest challenges facing American families and in turn America. First is access to good education. When this nation made 12 years of public education universal in the last century, it made us the best educated, best prepared nation in the world. It's, I believe, the overwhelming reason that propelled us to where we got in the 20th century. But the world's caught up or catching up. They're not waiting. I would say parenthetically, if we were sitting down, we set a bipartisan committee together and said, okay, we're going to decide what we do in terms of government providing for free education. I wonder whether we'd think, as we did in the 20th century, that 12 years is enough in the 21st century. I doubt it. 12 years is no longer enough today to compete with the rest of the world in the 21st century. That's why my American Families Plan guarantees 4 additional years of public education for every person in America, starting as early as we can. The great universities in this country have conducted studies of the last 10 years. It shows that adding 2 years of universal high-quality preschool for every 3-year-old and 4-year-old, no matter what background they come from, puts them in the position to be able to compete all the way through 12 years and increases exponentially their prospect of graduating and going on beyond graduation. The research shows when a young child goes to school, not daycare, they're far more likely to graduate from high school and go to college or something after high school. When you add 2 years of free community college on top of that, you begin to change the dynamic. We can do that. And we'll increase Pell Grants and invest in historical black colleges and universities, tribal colleges, minority-serving institutions. The reason is they don't have the endowments. But their students are just as capable of learning about cybersecurity, just as capable of learning about metallurgy, all the things that are going on that provide those jobs of the future. Jill is a community college professor who teaches today as First Lady. She's long said, if I've heard it once, I've heard it 1,000 times. Joe, any country that out-educates us is going to out-compete us. She'll be deeply involved in leading this effort. Thank you, Jill. Second thing we need, American Families Plan will provide access to quality, affordable child care. We guarantee when I'm proposing in legislation, we guarantee that low and middle income families will pay no more than 7% of their income for high quality care for children up to the age of 5. The most hard-pressed working families won't have to spend a dime. Third, the American Families Plan will finally provide up to 12 weeks of paid leave and medical leave, family medical leave. We're one of the few industrial countries in the world. No one should have to choose between a job and a paycheck or taking care of themselves and their loved ones or parent or spouse or child. And fourth, the American Family Plan puts directly into the pockets of millions of Americans. In March, we expanded tax credit for every child in a family, up to $3,000 per child if they're under 6 years of age. Over 6 years of age. And $3,600 for children over 6 years of age. With 2 parents, 2 kids, that's $7,200 in the pockets that are going to help take care of your family. And that will help more than 65 million children and help cut child care poverty in half. And we can afford it. So we did that in the in the last piece of legislation we passed. But let's extend that child care tax credit at least through the end of 2025. The American Rescue Plan lowered health care premiums for 9 million Americans who buy their coverage under the Affordable Care Act. I know that's really popular this side of the aisle. But let's make that provision permanent so their premiums don't go back up. In addition to my family's plan, I'm going to work with Congress to address this year other critical priorities for American families. The Affordable Care Act has been a lifeline for millions of Americans, protecting people with pre-existing conditions, protecting women's health, and the pandemic has demonstrated how badly it's needed. Let's lower deductibles for working families on the Affordable Care Act. And let's lower prescription drug costs. We know how to do this. The last president had that as an objective. We all know how outrageously expensive drugs are in America. In fact, we pay the highest prescription drug prices of anywhere in the world, right here in America. Nearly 3 times for the same drug, nearly 3 times what other countries pay. We have to change that, and we can. Let's do what we talked about for all the years I was down here in this body, in Congress. Let's give Medicare the power to save hundreds of billions of dollars by negotiating lower drug prescription prices. And by the way, it won't just help people on Medicare. Lower prescription drug costs for everyone. And the money we save, which is billions of dollars, can go to strengthen the Affordable Care Act and expand Medicare coverage benefits without costing taxpayers an additional penny. It's within our power to do it. Let's do it now. We've talked about it long enough, Democrats and Republicans. Let's get it done this year. This is all about a simple premise. Health care should be a right, not a privilege in America. So, how do we pay for my jobs and family plan? I made it clear we can do it without increasing the deficits. Let's start with what I will not do. I will not impose any tax increase on people making less than $400,000. But it's time for corporate America and the wealthiest 1% of Americans to just begin to pay their fair share. Just their fair share. Sometimes I have arguments with my friends in the Democratic Party. I think you should be able to become a billionaire and a millionaire, but pay your fair share. A recent study shows that 55 of the nation's biggest corporations paid 0 federal tax last year. Those 55 corporations made in excess of $40 billion in profit. A lot of companies also evade taxes through tax havens in Switzerland and Bermuda and the Cayman Islands. And they benefit from tax loopholes and deductions for offshoring jobs and shifting profits overseas. It's not right. We're going to reform corporate taxes so they pay their fair share and help pay for the public investments their businesses will benefit from as well. We're going to reward work, not just wealth. We take the top tax bracket for the wealthiest 1% of Americans, those making over $400,000 or more, back up to where it was when George W. Bush was president, when he started, 39.6%. That's where it was when George W. was president. We're going to get rid of the loopholes, allow Americans to make more than $1 million a year and pay a lower tax rate on their capital gains than Americans who receive a paycheck. We're only going to affect 0.3% of all Americans by that action, 0.3%. And the IRS is going to crack down on millionaires and billionaires who cheat on their taxes. It's estimated to be billions of dollars by think tanks that are left, right, and center. I'm not looking to punish anybody, but I will not add a tax burden, additional tax burden to the middle class in this country. They're already paying enough. I believe what I propose is fair, fiscally responsible, and it raises revenue to pay for the plans I propose and will create millions of jobs that will grow the economy and enhance our financial standing in the country. When you hear someone say they don't want to raise taxes on the wealthiest 1% or corporate America, ask them whose taxes you want to raise. Instead, whose are going to cut? Look, the big tax cut of 2017. Remember, it was supposed to pay for itself. That was how it was sold. And generate vast economic growth. Instead, it added $2 trillion to the deficit. It was a huge windfall for corporate America and those at the very top. Instead of using the tax saving to raise wages and invest in research and development, it poured billions of dollars into the pockets of CEOs. In fact, the pay gap between CEOs and their workers is now among the largest in history. According to one study, CEOs make 320 times what the average worker in their corporation makes. It used to be in below 100. The pandemic has only made things worse. 20 million Americans lost their job in the pandemic, working and middle-class Americans. At the same time, roughly 650 billionaires in America saw their net worth increase by more than $1 trillion in the same exact period. Let me say it again. 650 people increased their wealth by more than $1 trillion during this pandemic. And they're now worth more than $4 trillion. My fellow Americans, trickle down economics has never worked. And it's time to grow the economy from the bottom and the middle out. You know, there's a broad consensus of economists left, right, and center, and they agree what I'm proposing will help create millions of jobs and generate historic economic growth. These are among the highest values investments we can make as a nation. I've often said our greatest strength is the power of our example, not just the example of our power. In my conversations with world leaders, and I've spoken to over 38, 40 of them now, I've made it known that America's back. And you know what they say? The comment I hear most of all from them is they say, we see America's back, but for how long? But for how long? My fellow Americans, we have to show not just that we're back, but that we're back to stay, and that we aren't going to go it alone. We're going to do it by leading with our allies. No one nation can deal with all the crises of our time, from terrorism to nuclear proliferation, mass migration, cybersecurity, climate change, as well as what we're experiencing now, the pandemics. There's no wall high enough to keep any virus out. And our own vaccine supply, as it grows to meet our needs, and we're meeting them, will become an arsenal for vaccines for other countries, just as America was an arsenal for democracy for the world, and in consequence influence the world. But every American will have access before that occurs. Every American will have access to be fully covered by COVID-19 from the vaccines we have. Look, the climate crisis is not our fight alone, it's a global fight. The United States accounts, as all of you know, less than 15% of carbon emissions. The rest of the world accounts for 85%. That's why I kept my commitment to rejoin the Paris Accord, because if we do everything perfectly, it's not going to only matter. I kept my commitment to convene a climate summit right here in America with all the major economies of the world: China, Russia, India, European Union. And I said I'd do it in my first 100 days. I want to be very blunt about it. My attempt was to make sure that the world could see there was a consensus, that we are at an inflection point in history. The consensus is if we act to save the planet, we can create millions of jobs and economic growth and opportunity to raise the standard of living of almost everyone around the world. If you watched any of it and you were all busy, I'm sure you didn't have much time. That's what virtually every nation said, even the ones that aren't doing their fair share. The investments I proposed tonight also advance the foreign policy, in my view, that benefits the middle class. That means making sure every nation plays by the same rules in the global economy, including China. In my discussion with President Xi, I told him, we welcome the competition. We're not looking for conflict. But I made absolutely clear that we will defend America's interest across the board. America will stand up to unfair trade practices that undercut American workers and American industries, like subsidies from state to state-owned operations and enterprises, and the theft of American technology and intellectual property. I also told President Xi that we'll maintain a strong military presence in the Indo-Pacific, just as we do for NATO and Europe, not to start a conflict, but to prevent one. I told them what I've said to many world leaders, that America will not back away from our commitments, our commitment to human rights and fundamental freedoms, and to our alliances. And I pointed out to him, no responsible American president could remain silent when basic human rights are being so blatantly violated. An American president has to represent the essence of what our country stands for. America is an idea, the most unique idea in history. We are created, all of us, equal. It's who we are. And we cannot walk away from that principle and, in fact, say we're dealing with the American idea. With regard to Russia, I know it concerns some of you, but I made very clear to Putin that we're not going to seek escalation, but their actions will have consequences. They turn out to be true, and they turned out to be true. So I responded directly and proportionally to Russia's interference in our elections and the cyber attacks on our government and our business. They did both of these things, and I told them we would respond, and we have. But we can also cooperate when it's our mutual interest. We did it when we extended the New START Treaty on nuclear arms, and we're working to do it on climate change. But he understands we will respond. On Iran and North Korea, nuclear programs that present serious threats to American security and the security of the world. We're going to be working closely with our allies to address the threats posed by both of these countries through diplomacy as well as stern deterrence. And American leadership means ending the forever war in Afghanistan. We have without hyperbole, the greatest fighting force in the history of the world. I'm the first president in 40 years who knows what it means to have a son serving in a war zone. Today we have service members serving in the same war zone as their parents did. We have service members in Afghanistan who are not yet born on 9/11. The war in Afghanistan, as we remember the debates here, were never meant to be multi-generational undertakings of nation building. We went to Afghanistan to get the terrorists who attacked us on 9/11. And we said we would follow Osama bin Laden to the gates of hell to do it. If you've been in the upper Konar Valley, you've kind of seen the gates of hell. And we delivered justice to bin Laden. We degraded the terrorist threat of al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. And after 20 years of valor, and sacrifice, it's time to bring those troops home. Look, even as we do, we'll maintain over-the-horizon capacity to suppress future threats to the homeland. And make no mistake, in 20 years, terrorism has metastasized. The threat has evolved way beyond Afghanistan. Those of you in the intelligence committees, the foreign relations committee, defense committees, you know well, we have to remain vigilant against the threats to the United States wherever they come from. Al-Qaeda and ISIS are in Yemen, Syria, Somalia, other places in Africa, in the Middle East, and beyond. And we won't ignore what our intelligence agencies have determined to be the most lethal terrorist threat to the homeland today. White supremacy is terrorism. We're not going to ignore that either. My fellow Americans, look, we have to come together to heal the soul of this nation. It was nearly a year ago before her father's funeral when I spoke with Gianna Floyd, George Floyd's young daughter. She's a little tyke, so I was kneeling down to talk to her so I could look her in the eye. She looked at me, she said, "My daddy changed the world." Well, after the conviction of George Floyd's murderer, we can see how right she was if we have the courage to act as a Congress. We've all seen the knee of injustice on the neck of Black Americans. Now's our opportunity to make some real progress. The vast majority of men and women wearing a uniform and a badge serve our communities, and they serve them honorably. I know them. I know they want. I know they want to help meet this moment as well. My fellow Americans, we have to come together to rebuild trust between law enforcement and the people they serve, to root out systemic racism in our criminal justice system, and to enact police reform in George Floyd's name that passed the House already. I know Republicans have their own ideas and are engaged in very productive discussions with Democrats in the Senate. We need to work together to find a consensus. But let's get it done next month, by the first anniversary of George Floyd's death. The country supports this reform, and Congress should act. We have a giant opportunity to bend the arc of the moral universe toward justice, real justice. And with the plans outlined tonight, we have a real chance to root out systemic racism that plagues America and American lives in other ways. A chance to deliver real equity, good jobs, good schools, affordable housing, clean air, clean water, being able to generate wealth and pass it down to generations because you have access to purchase a house. Real opportunities in the lives of more Americans, Black, white, Latino, Asian Americans, Native Americans. Look, I also want to thank the United States Senate for voting 94-1 to pass the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act to protect Asian American and Pacific Islanders. You acted decisively. You can see on television the viciousness of the hate crimes we've seen over this past year and for too long. I urge the House to do the same and send that legislation to my desk, which I will gladly, anxiously sign. I also hope Congress will get to my desk the Equality Act to protect LGBTQ Americans. For all transgender Americans watching at home, especially young people, you're so brave. I want you to know your president has your back. Another thing, let's authorize the Violence Against Women Act, which has been law for 27 years. "27 years ago I wrote it. It'll close the act that has to be authorized now, will close the boyfriend loophole to keep guns out of the hands of abusers. The court order said this is an abuser. You can't own a gun. It's to close that loophole that existed. You know, it's estimated that 50 women are shot and killed by an intimate partner every month in America. 50 a month. Let's pass it and save some lives. And I need not tell anyone this, but gun violence has become an epidemic in America. The flag at the White House was still flying at half-mast for the 8 victims of the mass shooting in Georgia, when 10 more lives were taken in the mass shooting in Colorado. And in the week in between those two events, 250 other Americans were shot dead in the streets of America. 250 shot dead. I know how hard it is to make progress on this issue. In the 90s, we passed universal background checks, a ban on assault weapons and high-capacity magazines that hold 100 rounds that can be fired off in seconds. We beat the NRA. Mass shootings and gun violence declined. Check out the report over 10 years. But in the early 2000s, the law expired. We've seen daily bloodshed since. I'm not saying if the law continued, we wouldn't see bloodshed. More than 2 weeks ago in the Rose Garden, surrounded by some of the bravest people I know, the survivors and families who lost loved ones to gun violence, I laid out several of the Department of Justice actions that are being taken to impact on this epidemic. One of them is banning so-called ghost guns. These are homemade guns built from a kit that includes directions how to finish the firearm. The parts have no serial numbers, so they show up at crime scenes and they can't be traced. The buyers of these ghost gun kits aren't required to pass any background check. Anyone, from a criminal or terrorist, could buy this kit and within 30 minutes have a weapon that's lethal, but no more. And I'll do everything in my power to protect the American people from this epidemic of gun violence, but it's time for Congress to act as well. Look, I don't want to become confrontational, but we need more Senate Republicans to join the overwhelming majority of Democratic colleagues and close the loopholes required in background check purchases of guns. We need a ban on assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. And don't tell me it can't be done. We did it before and it worked. Talk to most responsible gun owners and hunters. They'll tell you there's no possible justification for having 100 rounds in a weapon. What do you think, deer are wearing Kevlar vests? And they'll tell you that there are too many people today who are able to buy a gun but shouldn't be able to buy a gun. These kinds of reasonable reforms have overwhelming support from the American people, including many gun owners. The country supports reform and Congress should act. This shouldn't be a red or blue issue. And no amendment to the Constitution is absolute. You can't yell fire in a crowded theater. From the very beginning, there were certain guns, weapons, that could not be owned by Americans. Certain people could not own those weapons ever. We're not changing the Constitution. We're being reasonable. I think this is not a Democrat or Republican issue. I think it's an American issue. And here's what else we can do. Immigration has always been essential to America. Let's end our exhausting war over immigration. For more than 30 years, politicians have talked about immigration reform, and we've done nothing about it. It's time to fix it. On day one of my presidency, I kept my commitment and sent a comprehensive immigration bill to the United States Congress. If you believe we need to secure the border, pass it, because it has a lot of money for high-tech border security. If you believe in a pathway to citizenship, pass it. There's over 11 million undocumented folks, the vast majority of here overstaying visas. Pass it. We can actually, if you actually want to solve a problem, I've sent a bill to take a close look at it. We also have to get at the root problem of why people are fleeing, particularly to our southern border from Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. The violence, the corruption, the gangs, the political instability, hunger, hurricanes, earthquakes, natural disasters. When I was president, when I was vice president, the president asked me to focus on providing help needed to address the root causes of migration. And it helped keep people in their own countries instead of being forced to leave. The plan was working, but the last administration decided it was not worth it. I'm restoring the program and asked Vice President Harris to lead our diplomatic effort to take care of this. I have absolute confidence she'll get the job done. Now look, if you don't like my plan, let's at least pass what we all agree on. Congress needs to pass legislation this year to finally secure protection for dreamers. The young people have only known America as their home. And permanent protection for immigrants who are here on temporary protective status who came from countries beset by man-made and natural-made violence and disaster. As well as a pathway to citizenship for farm workers who put food on our tables. Look, immigrants have done so much for America during this pandemic and throughout our history. The country supports immigration reform. We should act. Let's argue over it. Let's debate it. But let's act. And if we truly want to restore the soul of America, we need to protect the sacred right to vote. Most people more people voted in the last presidential election than any time in American history. In the middle of the worst pandemic ever. It should be celebrated. Instead, it's being attacked. Congress should pass H.R. 1 and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and send it to my desk right away. The country supports it, and Congress should act now. Look, in conclusion, as we gather here tonight, the image of a violent mob assaulting this Capitol, desecrating our democracy, remain vivid in all our minds. Lives were put at risk, many of your lives. Lives were lost. Extraordinary courage was summoned. The insurrection was an existential crisis, a test of whether our democracy could survive, and it did. But the struggle is far from over. The question of whether our democracy will long endure is both ancient and urgent. As old as our republic, still vital today. Can our democracy deliver on its promise that all of us, created equal in the image of God, had a chance to lead lives of dignity, respect, and possibility? Can our democracy deliver to the most pressing needs of our people? Can our democracy overcome the lies, anger, hate, and fears that have pulled us apart? America's adversaries, the autocrats of the world, are betting we can't. And I promise you, they're betting we can't. They believe we're too full of anger and division and rage. They look at the images of the mob that assaulted the Capitol as proof that the sun is setting on American democracy. But they're wrong. You know it, I know it. But we have to prove them wrong. We have to prove democracy still works, that our government still works, and we can deliver for our people. In our first 100 days together, we've acted to restore people's faith in democracy to deliver. We're vaccinating the nation. We're creating hundreds of thousands of new jobs. We're delivering real results to people. They can see it and feel it in their own lives. Opening doors of opportunity, guaranteeing some more fairness and justice. That's the essence of America. That's democracy in action. Our Constitution opens with the words, as trite as it sounds, we the people. Well, it's time to remember that we the people are the government. You and I. Not some force in a distant capital. Not some powerful force that we have no control over. It's us. It's we the people. In another era, when our democracy was tested, Franklin Roosevelt reminded us, in America, we do our part. We all do our part. That's all I'm asking. That we do our part, all of us. And if we do that, we will meet the center challenge of the age by proving that democracy is durable and strong. Autocrats will not win the future. We will. America will. And the future belongs to America. As I stand here tonight before you in a new and vital hour of life and democracy of our nation, and I can say with absolute confidence, I have never been more confident or optimistic about America. Not because I'm president, because of what's happening with the American people. We've stared into the abyss of insurrection and autocracy, pandemic and pain, and we, the people, did not flinch. At the very moment our adversaries were certain we'd pull apart and fail, we came together, we united. With light and hope, we summoned a new strength, new resolve to position us to win the competition of the 21st century. On our way to a union more perfect, more prosperous, and more just, as one people, one nation, and one America. Folks, as I told every world leader I've ever met with over the years, it's never, ever, ever been a good bet to bet against America, and it still isn't. We're the United States of America. There's not a single thing, nothing beyond our capacity. We can do whatever we set our minds to if we do it together. So let's begin to get together. God bless you all, and may God protect our troops. Thank you for your patience.
There it is. There is the president's speech. They are always, when America is in a time of crisis, they are always something that brings massive change. I remember we got the Great Society and the first speech of the new year with a new president after Kennedy was killed, which apparently was not a big threat to our democracy. We had all kinds of new things that were proposed in government, very reminiscent of this, when we had the Great Depression with FDR. His first speech in '33 laid out the New Deal, which, again, was not a threat to our democracy. Same thing with Pearl Harbor. Again, not a threat to our democracy. We haven't had a big threat to our democracy since the Civil War. It's really only been January 6th. I have so much to say and comment on, and I will decode what was said here. It is vital that you understand exactly what he was saying. I think some people could watch this if they're not in tune with really what's going on in Washington, D.C., they will say, that was a good speech, it was feel good. But if you don't know your butt from your elbow, that's what you would say. Some people might just look at this and say he just proposed over $5 trillion of spending when we have already spent $19 trillion in the last 12 months alone. The author of the book American Marxism, that is coming out next month. It's available for pre-order right now. Mark Levin joins us from BlazeTV. Mark, your thoughts?
You know, Glenn, I started to take notes. And
I know.
This guy's bouncing around all over the place. It was a speech written by a fifth grader. That said, you're right. Substantively, this is a frontal attack on our constitutional system and limited government. It is a frontal attack on our capitalist system. He's basically throwing out all the bromides for all the radical left groups that form the base of the modern Democrat Party. And I make the case that, clearly not in all the particulars and so forth, but when you hear about the class warfare, attacking your own country is systemically racist, that it's immigrants, not citizens, who make the country. When you listen to the oppressed and the oppressor and the class warfare, this is Marxist bullcrap in its broadest sense. Now, all that said, here we are, a country now where one man can get up in the middle of the night and make a list of everything he wants to do to the country. You know what? I think we should extend education for 4 years. I go, what the hell is he talking about? Well, no. I think we should give all DACA citizenship no matter what. Oh, what is he talking about? Oh, Trump screwed up the border, and here I am trying to get comprehension. It goes on. It's like an unreality. We're living in separate worlds. Just looking at them. Every person in that chamber is vaccinated. Not one of them needs to wear a mask or to be 6 feet apart from each other.
Well, you know, it's
the whole
interesting.
thing is a fraud. Go ahead.
It was interesting, Mark, to watch beforehand, before the president came in, things that were not covered. We just got the raw feed from Washington, D.C. For 30 minutes, we saw them standing side by side, hugging each other, kissing through the mask. You saw, actually, Jill Biden, Dr. Jill Biden, do the same thing. There were no social distancing at all in the prior 30 minutes. It was all a show, period. All a show.
Well, I mean, I'll give you another example, right? Nancy Pelosi passes a rule that you're not supposed to use specific words that identify an individual's biological genitalia. Right? So what does Biden do? He turns around and he says, never before in American history has a president ever been here, 2 women behind me. The problem with the radicals is they can't even keep track of their own schizophrenia here. On the one hand, we Americans can do this. We can do this. We're the greatest, but we're systemically racist. We go, what the hell? We're systemically racist, but we are the greatest people who can do anything. This was a speech, a Castro-like speech without the passion. As he's going through one issue after another, one part of our society after another, he wants to eliminate right-to-work states and force everybody into unions, even though they don't want to be in unions. 90% of the people who work in this country in the private sector are not unionized. He talks about extending education. He doesn't talk about school choice. He doesn't even talk about opening the LA school system or the Chicago school system. But we should extend it 4 years. Why? To featherbed the unions, that's why. He goes on and on about we need to have free this and free that, and in order to pay for it, we'll hammer the successful and the wealthy people. Did you know 55 corporations don't pay any taxes? You know what else? There were 2 S corporations that didn't pay any Medicare taxes and Obamacare taxes. His, that he set up when he was earning $13 million a year. He didn't pay Obamacare and Medicare taxes because he set up 2 S corporations. I don't have a problem with closing, quote unquote, those loopholes, but why punish everybody, the entire society? Now, he goes on and on about the noble nature of government. Glenn, I tried to keep track of the number of new programs this man proposed. I couldn't keep track. No. Number one, I got bored. And number two, I'm thinking, what is going on here? It's like a kid in a candy shop. We should do this, we should do... And here's what it told me. Our constitutional firewalls have been breached. There's no talk about limited government. There's no talk about private property rights. There's no talk about individual liberty. None of those words passed his lips. There's not even a second thought about this. We have a Democrat Party that is fundamentally a tyrannical party that hates this country. What do they say that's good about this country other than we should rally around their agenda? I'm not going to rally around their agenda. Did they say anything positive about capitalism and free markets? Not a word. Did they say anything positive about liberty or how we're going to expand it? Not a word. Did he mention a colorblind society? That's how we get along. Not a word. Did you hear him say anything positive and constructive about law enforcement? Not a word.
Well,
Did he attack the rioters?
He did say the majority are are good people that are not, the bad guys. But the table, we heard that and we all said at the same time, then how come you're not treating them that way? I mean, the thing is when they did say things, it rang so hollow because it's the opposite message that they pound all the time.
Talks about guns. Did he talk about the gangbangers who are killing little kids in the inner cities? No, he talks about these mass murders, and then he says 250 people have been killed since. Well, who's been killed? How have they been killed? Who's killed them?
Exactly right.
Because the Democrats control these cities, and they don't have any answers. And so they go after law-abiding gun owners. That's what they do. Just think of any part of the Bill of Rights that he defend. No, he didn't defend that. Did he come out against the attempts to pack the court? No, he didn't come out against attempts to pack the court. This was really a hardcore leftist speech that Bernie Sanders or anybody else could have given, but it was in many ways monotonous, to be perfectly honest. I was yawning through it all. I understand how serious this is. I don't know how many Americans were actually watching it, and that's a problem. I think what I got out of this speech is we are in deep S because this guy is pushing this agenda because of his legacy, because this is what people are telling him to do. He thinks he's found his zone. You know, FDR, in his the second election after FDR first won, they had 17 Republican senators and 91 Republican House members. He won and he slaughtered the Republicans. He had a mandate. It's the closest House of Representatives in a century. It's a tied Senate, but for the vote of Harris that breaks ties. He has no mandate. He lies. He talks about all the vaccines we now have. All the vaccines we now have, we know, but because of Trump.
Correct. And because of the system, because of capitalism. This wasn't a government. Remember, while we're making the vaccines, the British were begging the government to allow the free market to do something, to be able to have the authority to try to come up with vaccines and other things. They were begging. And that's the system he is holding up and saying that that's why we have these things. Did you notice, Mark, how many times he said, and I wrote it down, in the first 5 minutes alone, he was not talking to the American people. I've never heard a president say this. He said, because of all of you. And he was not talking about the American people. He was talking about the people in the chamber, because of all you. He then said, you know things, you know better than really any other group in America. Again, because of you. He said that probably 6 times in the first 10 minutes. I've never seen a president speak directly to the people of power and say, it's you that is changing the world, instead of the American people. He said that later, but it rang hollow because he expressed already who was changing the world, and it was Congress.
Well, it also rang hollow because he spent a paragraph or two talking about systemic racism. And then at the end he says, we the people, and I'm thinking to myself, how much longer are the Democrats going to get away with this? Trashing the American people and then having these throwaway lines about how we're great people, we the people. We the people have absolutely no say in what's going on right now. Let's understand. Nancy Pelosi is not having what they call regular order with committee hearings where you and I can talk to a member of Congress. We can't even get into the Congress. We can't even get to the Capitol building right now. She's got proxy votes. Still, even with the vaccine and so forth, where one member can vote for 20. They don't even have to show up. Democracy? Look what's going on in the Senate. 50-50. They have perverted this whole budget reconciliation process to ram through trillions of dollars. $6 trillion they're talking about? He's wrecking the economy. And so I'm sitting here thinking, Hillary Clinton once said, when she was running, I forget which time, in the Democrat primary for president, she said, I have a million ideas. That's the problem. Yeah. It's one thing if Glenn has a million ideas and I have a million ideas in our private lives, in the private sector with a private business. We don't want politicians to have a million ideas. Follow the Constitution and get out of our face. This is exactly the opposite of this. Tell me, when you listen to him speak, is this a country that even has a Constitution left? No state authority, the Ninth Amendment, personal unalienable rights, protection of private property under the Fifth Amendment.
Well, remember,
he doesn't talk about the censorship that's going on, none of it.
No amendment is absolute. No amendment. By the way, you can cry fire in a crowded movie theater. I opened my last tour up. I opened every movie theater, or every theater I was in. I cried fire. You can do that. It is such a ridiculous thing to say. The Constitution is absolute. Those amendments are absolute. There is freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom to keep and bear arms, freedom to be free of a government that is searching through your stuff without a warrant. I mean, I know you know this, Mark. I read a story today. The FBI, what did they call that, Jason? The FBI didn't even get the FISA warrant. They called it a back channel or backdoor search. What the hell is that? And they were looking at people after January 6th with no warrant. And they were just going through their things to see if they were a threat, for white extremism. Look, I want to get the bad guys just as much as anybody, but I will tell you, if we don't have a warrant system, everyone is in danger. Everyone is in danger.
You think the framers would recognize this country?
No, not today.
I don't think they'd recognize it at all. This kind of a speech, this is an incredible speech. So this is why I want us to have a very open mind about something here. When you call somebody a Marxist or you call this Marxism, people immediately talk about the Red Scare, they feign, or they turn to their pseudo-scholarship and they say, well, he's not talking about taking over businesses and running businesses. Listen to me. If you're threatening businesses, if you're regulating businesses, you can do anything you want to businesses. If you're taxing them, confiscatory, massive taxes, if you're talking like a Marxist about class warfare, if you're talking about oppression versus the oppressed, if you're using all the lingo, it doesn't matter if in all the particulars you're not following exactly the Communist Manifesto or other things that Marx wrote about. In fact, even the most aggressive Marxist regimes aren't really following Marx to the T because Marx didn't tell them how to run a government. All of that said, it's time to call these people out. It's time to use the proper language. They're not progressives. That's a word they came up with, as you well know, 100 years ago. There's nothing progressive about it. They're not democratic socialists. They're not what I used to call them even statists, which is bad enough. They're taking the lingo, they're taking the language of the Marxists, so we have to confront them. The Democrat Party is now gone as the traditional kind of old liberal Democrat Party. That simply does not exist anymore. And when you hear them say, Biden said it tonight, John Kerry has said it before, even if we get rid of every carbon molecule, it's not enough. Yep. Then we got to go back into the atmosphere and suck it out with a giant Hoover. They don't even know what carbon dioxide is. The fact of the matter is there's no end to this. What did Black Lives Matter, one of their spokesmen said? We're never stopping. It doesn't matter how many cops are found guilty. Well, what is that exactly? It's not liberalism. It's not democratic socialism. It's Marxism. They want to take down the society. So what I call American Marxism. It's an American form of Marxism that's been developed, that has been pushed in our law schools, in our colleges, and it's had an impact. When you hear Joe Biden, this Joe Biden that we hear tonight and that we've seen, that's not the Joe Biden we saw. Joe Biden was pretty much a political street thug. That's what he was. He'd go after Bob Bork. He'd go after Clarence Thomas. He'd work with the segregationists and racists if that worked. He'd work with a guy like Ted Kennedy if that worked. He was all over the map. He was pretty much a chameleon. Look where he is today. Because he wants his legacy. And he knows to have a legacy, for the historians to write the books, spreading freedom is boring. Doing little to interfere with the economy is boring. If the economy is going to grow, and it was predicted to grow big, I gotta get in front of this with massive programs. I've got to have history books written about me, because when I'm dead and gone, that's all that matters. This guy doesn't give a damn about this country. And one last thing, I know you have others there. Really what's going on here is the Democrat Party is empowering the Democrat Party. The party comes first, not the country. Everything they're doing, whether it's H.R. 1 or S1 to destroy our voting system, or pack the Supreme Court, or pack the Senate, or buy off all their special interest groups by redistributing money from Republicans to Democrats, or what have you. It's all intended to create a one-party country like they have one-party states, to destroy any opposition, the Republican Party, to use their surrogates to destroy free speech, big tech, big media, all the same. So this isn't just liberalism run amok. It's not just democratic socialism, whatever the hell that means. It is much more nefarious. And I think we got to start thinking about it that way. At least that's my proposition.
Mark, please send me a copy of the book early so I can be ready to talk about it with you when the book comes out. It's ready for pre-order now. It's American Marxism. Back in 2016, I probably was the leading voice on progressives for a long time. And in 2016, I said, the progressive era is now over. The progressives have taken it as far as they possibly can. Now they have to unmask as Marxists. And that is exactly what you're talking about. And you're exactly right. Exactly right. Mark, thank you for being on tonight. Thank you for everything that you do.
Hey, Glenn, I want to thank you for everything you do. You're absolutely a great patriot. What we do here on this digital TV platform is enormously important. But you've been absolutely outstanding, and I want to thank you for your friendship too. And I'm very sorry about the death in your family.
Thank you, Mark.
God bless you, my friend.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much. I am going to give you my opinion here in just a second, and I think I have a different take than at least what I've heard there. I'm going to check in first with Steve Deace, see what he has to say, and then a roundtable here. We're waiting for Deace, so let's go to the roundtable now, and then I'll give you my opinion after Steve Deace. What'd you take from that?
I loved how he opened. Well, I didn't love it, but I thought it set the theme. How he opened up with crisis and opportunity, which I thought was very fitting. Everything right now they're trying to turn into a crisis. Pandemic panic, which shouldn't be a pandemic, but they are perpetuating it so that it will become an opportunity. Everything else between, I about lost my mind. The first 14, 15 minutes was all things, and Mark Levin just brought that up, but the first 15 minutes was all about the vaccine. None of that had anything to do with what Biden did.
No, in fact, Joe Biden during the campaign said that's a fiction, that is a fantasy. That is a miracle, and I remember him saying it clearly. No miracles are coming, America.
Right.
It was one of the bleakest things I've ever heard. Now he's taking credit for that miracle.
And consider, that's the highest thing he's polling on right now. He doesn't have awesome numbers, but the highest thing he's polling on is his response to COVID-19. Well, you didn't change anything. Mask mandates and public transport in federal areas, it was already happening. Everybody was already wearing a mask. They were already on record, a record pace for people getting vaccinated. You did nothing on that. But now they're giving him all the credit, and that was how he opened up his speech. It was absolutely agonizing.
And if he wouldn't have won, if Trump were still in office, they would be saying the exact opposite. You can't trust this. This is no good. I mean, what Mark said a minute ago is they don't care about the country. There's a lot of people. Some on the right side as well, but the American people, I think, Democrat and Republican, that are paying attention, they do care about the country.
Yeah.
And I was deeply offended by much of this speech.
Yes, that's a great way of putting it. First of all, it was actually less exciting than the Oscars, which is incredible.
Big. That's big.
I almost, for the first time in my career, I almost said, and then I corrected myself, and I just was like, whoa, make note of that. I almost said to the producers, can we just cut away from this and let's just start? It was so predictable and boring.
And Mark laid this out really well, which was he was about to fall asleep.
Yeah.
And he knows it's terrible, and he knows no one's watching it, and that's terrible because this is their theory. This is their working theory on how to make this president work. Hide him and bore everybody to that death while being incredibly aggressive with what he's doing. And it's effective. The vaccine thing was infuriating. I mean, if you go back to 2000, I think it was mid 2020, maybe late summer, there's a great 60 Minutes episode, and I don't say that very often, but there was a great 60 Minutes episode with General Gustav Perna, and he was the head of the logistics program for Trump and the vaccine. And he goes through this incredibly detailed arrangement. And he laid the entire thing out about how they're going to get vaccines to certain people. And he goes through the whole thing. It's really a really good watch. I encourage you to Google it at some point today. Guess who's currently heading the vaccine logistics program? General Gustav Perna. The same freaking guy from that 60 Minutes episode is still doing it. And Biden is trying to take credit for this. Obviously, I mean, it's so ridiculous. Can you imagine what the reaction from the media would be if a factory was making Johnson & Johnson vaccine under Trump and 15 million doses just went through the wayside because they screwed them up?
Yeah.
Can you imagine if they pulled off the J&J vaccine for a week and a half if Trump was president? He would get all the blame. Mm-hmm. That has not been a blip on the radar for Biden. He's taken all the credit for the stuff that Trump plus capitalism, plus big pharmaceutical companies did. And all of that credit, instead of going to Trump, is going to Biden, and no one questions it. And now he comes out after telling everyone, as you point out, Glenn, that it was a miracle that could not come. He told, think of that just from the perspective of a religious person. To tell people that a miracle is not coming is about the most anti-faith thing I can possibly imagine.
Yeah,
you don't get to limit God, as far as I know.
It's why it stood out to me when he said, I've never heard a president say anything like that, or a candidate say anything like that. Have no hope. Mm-hmm. A miracle is not coming. We have a dark and bleak winter ahead of us. Mm-hmm. And now it's all fixed. Now it's all great. It's all great. Miracles. Because he came into office. It was agonizing.
I like how you pointed out to Mark how, and I noticed that too, within the first 5-10 minutes, he kept talking about how great they were doing. Like, this is all because of you.
It's all about government.
Mm-hmm. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, you were the ones responsible for shutting all the private businesses down. That was your fault.
He said, the people, this is no fault of their own. And I couldn't have kept silent if I were sitting in that room. I would have said, no, it's all of you people that shut it down.
Right.
It's you people.
Right.
You didn't solve it. You caused it. Mm-hmm. Which is always the way autocrats, dictators, Marxists operate. They cause the problem, and then they come in as the hero as well. Let's go to Steve Deace now. Steve is joining us. Your quick thoughts. I know you're going to be covering this tomorrow on the radio show, and I'm going to be doing the same tomorrow on Blaze. But tell me your initial thoughts here, Steve.
Well, I watched it. You know me, Glenn. I tried to find some contrarian angle to this. So I watched it without the sound on. I just watched the visual in and of itself. And a couple of things stood out to me. I've never seen one person hold a fawning stare without breaking a stride for that long in my entire life. I thought she was a character at the Wax Museum. Of course, I'm talking about Vice President Kamala Harris. That was damned impressive. The level of eye discipline that she exhibited there truly was Guinness worthy of honor. Nancy Pelosi did not look well. I thought Joe Biden came across physically, just in terms of the visual, old and frail. Mitt Romney got really old all of a sudden. And I like Chuck Schumer's blue suit. I thought that was pretty sharp, Glenn.
So beyond that, let's pretend that you did actually listen to the speech. What did it tell you about where we are, where we're headed?
I don't really think it told us anything, that we didn't know. We have irreconcilable viewpoints about how to proceed as a civilization here. This idea that it's not even two Americas any longer. It's the left America and then what's left of America, Glenn. I think that the what's left of America has got to get its stuff together here pretty quick. And it's got this, loose coalition and consortium of some critical thinkers on the left of center. I mean, lately, Bill Maher sounds like the Steve Deace Show, for example. Mm-hmm. You've got libertarians, conservatives, people who put the fun in fundamentalism like me. There's this mishmash of people that would like to go back to the America we used to argue and scream at each other about here in the next 10 minutes. Yet there's this rising tide here in the spirit of the age that's like, you know what, we're going to kind of go ahead and take all of Western civilization down right in front of you, if you don't mind. And so what's left of America better realize that rumbling sound are those Visigoths here. They just about arrived at the wall. Do you have a plan? Do you know what your vision is? Because you're going to need more than we're just against that.
Do we have that? Do we have that even in us?
I don't think so. There's an old Japanese proverb that came out of the 80s when we were competing head-to-head really hardcore with them, Glenn, in the auto industry. And what they used to tell their people over there is the Japanese used to observe Americans and say, hey, they don't have the time to do the job right the first time, but they always have the time to do it right over again. Okay? And so I think that preemptive action is just not something particularly those of us in the what's left of America are good at. We have jobs. Well, we used to. We have companies. Well, we used to have those. We have churches. Well, most of those are closed. We don't have those. Come to think of it, Glenn, we got all kinds of time actually right now. We don't have jobs. We don't have companies, and our churches are closed. This is now a perfect time for us to take activism seriously and diligently and do a little bit more than tuning into the Steve Deace and Glenn Beck shows and getting riled up and sending an email and voting Republican. And I did my part and then on with my merry life as I watched them haul it away right in front of me. That's not going to be good enough any longer.
Steve Deace, we'll see you tomorrow morning on Blaze TV. Steve is the host of the Steve Deace Show, which immediately follows my program on Blaze TV. Also, best-selling author of the Faucian Bargain. I'm surprised you didn't say anything at all about all of the COVID talk here, Steve. I'll give you one last chance to go after that.
I'm sorry. I was triple masked and passed out, Glenn. So I missed all of that. I was jogging with Joy Williams. She was double masked. I thought I got to one-up her. So I triple masked and I passed out right at the finish line. So I apologize.
Thanks a lot, Steve. I appreciate it. Okay.
Thank you, Glenn.
Before I get to mine, last thought from either of you two on any of it.
Well, fire in a crowded theater. Can we go there for 1 second?
Yes.
That comes from a terrible Supreme Court ruling in which they threw someone in prison for making a pamphlet that was anti-draft. So every time they bring this, and it was a socialist, by the way, who went to prison for coming up with an anti-draft pamphlet because they said that wasn't protected either. That's where that comes from. The actual standard here is you can't incite people, right? You can't do something that would obviously or objectively lead people to violence. The imminent violence, by the way, it could be a slow burn and you're actually okay.
That's how we've seen with the Democratic Party.
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
And the other thing I would say is, there was this thing that went around, and I may have fallen asleep at this point, but this thing that went around beforehand that he was going to say and I don't remember him actually saying it, but that this was the biggest attack.
He said at the very beginning.
The very beginning.
I
may have been infuriating about vaccines or something. The worst attack against our democracy since the Civil War. If you were really going to think about that and wanted to come up with an example of the worst, and much worse than I would argue January 6th, would be the shooting at the baseball field. They actually tried to kill 10% of the Republican Party that was elected. They tried to kill them on the field, and they shot some of them. That actually just happened. The fact that some people went into this room, and believe me, as we've pointed out many times, I think that was a really terrible moment in American history, but nothing compared to a gunman trying to execute 10% of one of the parties.
Yeah.
And somehow that's not even a thing. When we think of gun violence against political figures, somehow the right's the one that gets blamed for that.
I say Parkland. What do you know? What comes to mind?
Well, the shooting.
Right. Well, if I say Las Vegas.
The Vegas shooting.
Okay. Mm-hmm. If I say Alexandria, nothing comes to mind. I have to say Alexandria, baseball field,
Republicans, yeah. Steve Scalise.
Yeah. It was such a nothing story that we don't even have a name for it. I could say any shooting.
Yeah, Columbine, Virginia Tech.
You know it.
Pulse nightclub. I mean, we could...
But not this one.
Not this one. No name for it. Amazing.
Okay, quickly.
Yeah, I got to go back to him addressing Congress and not addressing the people. He, at the very end, actually I'll go back to a recording that we heard from the Great Reset from Davos, where they said big government is back. And we know this administration is all about Davos and the Great Reset. And that's the only thing I caught from this entire speech. It seemed like he was always touting the successes of government and what government can do, and really what private business can't do. And at the very end of the speech, he was like, we've turned a corner, we faced down all this stuff, and now we're going strong. I didn't get the sense that he was talking about the American people there. I got the sense he was talking about the people that were standing there in the chambers.
Exactly right.
The entire time, every time he said something, it was all about, the progress that government can do. And I felt like he was saying that we don't trust private businesses. We don't trust you, the American people, to get this done. He touted DARPA and how he was saying all these technological breakthroughs from DARPA. Okay, what about what
about Google?
What about Google? What about the guys that were in their garages?
Right. What about Microsoft?
What are your plans to enable them? I kept saying, well, if you want to help, get out of their way. Yes. That's what you need to do. And that's the fundamental, Steve Deace talked about that too, the fundamental differences in this country. There's such a huge divide there. Yeah. They believe that everything comes through government, whatever they can provide for us, the idiots. And the people that are all about private businesses, the businesses, entrepreneurs, nothing for them. And you're going to get no help.
And when you go against what you just talked about and let these companies do these things, what you get is the miracle he said couldn't come.
Yeah.
These vaccines all came from these largely from private companies.
All right, I want to show you some things. We talked about this today. The one thing that we haven't talked about, and I will bet you that none of the networks are talking about this today, and it is something that happens after every single speech in my lifetime. When it's a laundry list of things, the anchors always say, we did some back of the napkin figuring. He's just proposed $580 billion in spending. We don't have to do back of the napkin. He's already proposed these things, and they're already working their way through Congress. He proposed $5 trillion. $5 trillion of new spending. I want to show you some numbers here on the U.S. debt. Let's go with President debt chart. If you look at this is U.S. debt from George Washington to George W. Bush. 82 million, 2.6 billion. These are in adjusted dollars. FDR, 258 billion. Carter was the first one to add $1 trillion. Reagan doubled that, almost tripled it. But look what Bill Clinton did. George W. Bush did $11.9 trillion. That's where we were at the end of George W. Bush, $11.9 trillion. We are now at almost $30 trillion. We're at, I think, $28 trillion. If you look at our national debt, that's at the end of the Trump administration. Now, what they don't tell you is that the Federal Reserve has also printed another $6 trillion and just given it to the banks, okay, to make sure that they can cover everything. So $6 trillion, your money, has gone to the banks. We have now spent in the last 12 months $19 trillion. If this $5 trillion goes through, $19 trillion. And when Joe Biden said, oh, you know, I feel like we're really going to have a boom, of course we are. There's $19 trillion. There's only $50 trillion when you add up all of the money in the entire world that is spent every year. That is $50 trillion. 50. We just printed and handed to people 19, about half of all of the money that is even out in the world. We just printed it. Let me show you a stack of, there's a stack of $1 billion. Just to give you, that's a stack of $1 trillion. See the little person there in the corner? If $1 trillion laid, you know, end to end, would stretch 96 million miles. That is farther away than the sun. That's 1 trillion. When he says, Kamala, you're going to oversee all of this money, really? How much are we spending on accountants to make sure that $19 trillion, oh, I don't know, $1 billion of it doesn't go to some very dark places? This is not even what I wanted you to take from this. I want to show you a couple of things. Construction cost for the Golden Gate Bridge was $677 million in today's money. Construction of the Hoover Dam, $2.1 billion. Now, they made this into the moonshot speech. He's asked for $5 trillion. And we know what we got at the end of that decade. Man on the moon and returning home safely. Tonight he asked for $5 trillion. The cost of the entire Apollo program from 1960 to 1973 in today's dollars was $201 billion. The cost to just land on the moon, just this, was $2.5 billion. He suggested $5 trillion one-time investment. Yet because we don't get another shot at $5 trillion. But this is just something that we need to wake up to. There's no way out if we're spending money like this. There's no way out. You're going to see inflation. For the very simple reason, there is too much money in the system right now. And the minute we start to spend it, most Americans have put their money in the bank and they're not spending their money. Rich Americans are spending the money, but the average American is not. They have more in their savings account now than they have. Once that money starts to be spent and there's velocity, when they try to buy things that the average guy was making in the factories, that guy is staying at home. That factory can't hire anyone because the government is paying them too much money, so they're staying home. So they're not making anything. Too many dollars chasing too few goods. That's the definition of inflation. We are going to see a boom, but we are going to see inflation that will boggle your mind coming soon. Okay, one more thing, and I'm going to talk about much more on the radio show tomorrow, but this is the one thing that I think you should take away. The reason why, when he said, all of you, it's all happened because of what you've done. And he was talking to the members of Congress, not you. He said that over and over and over again. See if we can get a count on that for tomorrow's radio broadcast, and a count of something else. He kept saying that, all of you. Then he said something else, and I'd like a count of this. Do it. Just do it. We can't wait. Pass it. Pass it now. Send it to my desk. The world will not wait. Notice he said that over and over and over again. Fine, let's argue about it, but let's pass what we can agree on. Okay? Why is that important? That's important, especially if you know what he said, and I'm going to give the verbatim prior to this speech. And I'm quoting the president. And I really believe, because I've spoken with over, I guess, by that time, 25 to 30 heads of state, including Putin and including President Xi in China. I had a 2-hour conversation with Xi, and I've been convinced for a long time. Listen to this. I've been convinced for a long time. I doubt whether most of you would agree with me, but I think they're going to write about this point in history. Not about any of us, but whether or not democracy can function in the 21st century, then you know this is him, because he follows that with, not a joke. Whether autocracy is the answer. They were my discussions and debates I've had in the many times I've met with President Xi. Think about it. You know, things are moving so damn rapidly. Things are changing so rapidly in the world, in science and technology, and the whole range of other issues, that the question is, in a democracy that's such a genius as ours, can you get consensus in the time frame that can compete with autocracy? So what did he say today? He made it very clear the reason why things are improving in America is because of the people in that room. Okay? One. Then he challenged the other side. You can't wait. The world won't wait. We have to act now. Pass it now. Over and over and over again. And then he said basically these words. In the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the speech, he said, there's a great debate whether or not a democracy can survive, or if it's got to be autocratic because things are changing so rapidly, comma. And that's why I suggest and I ask you to pass the Family Act. What does child care have to do with whether or not democracy can beat autocratic rule? Answer, nothing. Nothing. He was putting that in to plant the seed, to let people understand this is where we're headed, because this system is broken, because he can't get the people on the other side of the aisle. And so you're gonna look, the Great Reset is happening. They're not waiting. These companies are already doing it, and you can either get on board or not, but it has to happen because we're creating good jobs. We're gonna take all of the lead pipes out of every school in America, and those are good paying jobs. Yes, until we finish those 400 schools, and then what? And then what? That does not create wealth. That spends. It's like when you have something wrong with your house and it doesn't matter to you. It's not going to change your life. It's not going to make things easier, but you have to fix the house, okay? That doesn't create any wealth. That doesn't do anything. You're just spending the money there to do that. Now, it might be the right thing, but that's not something you build a nation on. Hey, you know what? You know that crappy problem that really is not really affecting your life, but might in 20 years? We're going to create new jobs. We're going to fix all those problems. That's not a great nation. That's not a moonshot. That's getting you to work for the government. That's getting you to do the things the government is telling you that they want to do. So, can democracy survive? Well, if everything is passed the way they want it. Otherwise, they're going to have court reform. They're going to have to get rid of the filibuster because we cannot wait. What he's asking for is a rubber stamp. It's exactly the same thing FDR asked for. And at that point, the Democrats said no to it. But I don't think there's a single Democrat there that will say no to any of this thing. Tonight, if you listen to what he said prior to, as reported, I just gave it to you, as reported by CNN, and then you watch the way this speech was written, he was telling you we are headed towards China. The Chinese think that works. I still am out. I still don't know. But we got to act right now, and that'll prove to me that maybe some of my doubts are unfounded. But if we don't act now, we've got to go in the way of China. That is the Great Reset. Notice that he used Build Back Better, which is from the World Economic Forum. That is the slogan of the Great Reset. Last thing. I've said this for a long time. In studying the Democrats and the Marxists and the progressives, they have a tell. They have a tell. And their tell is whatever they say about you, they're doing. Have you noticed that? You know, these racists. Well, wait, you're the one who's calling everybody a racist. You're the one who's trying to flip a colorblind society and say, nope, the only thing that really matters is race. I'm the racist? Seems like you are. Every time they point, and they point the finger at you and say, this is what they're doing. They're doing it. What has been the charge against Donald Trump? He's a dictator. He's an autocratic ruler. He wants a police state. He wants complete control. He doesn't care about the press. He doesn't care about freedom of speech. He is a dictator. This speech shows what road they're on. They're on that road. They have been self-diagnosing and telling us exactly where they're going. And tonight is the first night that I can say, don't ever say to me again, the Great Reset is malarkey or a conspiracy theory. Tonight, he proved that is the road we are on. And it is not a road America has ever been on or ever should be on. I'll have more on this on tomorrow's radio program. By the way, thank you. I have to tell you, I am more concerned about freedom. I am more concerned about not just my voice, Mark Levin, Dave Rubin, anybody on Blaze TV. I am more concerned about freedom and the freedom to speak our mind than ever before. We know where they're headed. If you find anything that we do valuable, I would ask, please, to support us. I think it's going to become extraordinarily dangerous to have an opinion. And who knows, you may receive some ESG downgrades because you are a member of BlazeTV.com. Wear it as a badge of honor. These are the times we were called for. This is the mission we were sent here for. These are the times that try men's souls. And these are the times where either heroes or cowards will be remembered. Let us all pray that we can be remembered as a hero, not a coward. We're in it together. Join us at blazetv.com/Glenn. Use the promo code Malarkey and you'll save $20. We'll see you tomorrow on the radio. Good night.
all those other things. I get lost.
By the
in
way,
all the
free
stuff.
tuition